So welcome to our webinar today. Today we're going to break down details around standing charges and the expected changes. We're also joined by NFU policy team to highlight areas of wider support that we're lobbying for. We'll try and pick up questions as and when. However, there will be a Q&A at the end. Please feel free to add questions into the Q&A box, which is on the top bar of your Teams window. I'm Colleen, I'm Head of Sales at NFU Energy. Jenny, if you could change your slide over. So NFU are the energy consultancy business within the wider NFU group. We cover a number of different areas relating to energy costs, renewable generation, compliances, and any permit requirements. This will cover NFU members and also different industry sectors as well. So effectively anything that's energy related, we can offer an expert advice or service on. Now into the webinar, let's have a look at the breakdown of our energy costs. There's a lot of chatter currently going on at the moment with budgets and business costs. Today, we're going to focus on energy costs. With the drive to electrify vehicles, manufacturing processes, and move away from fossil fuel use, there's a massive pressure being added to our ageing infrastructure in the UK. From a high-level view and using a rough average to look at energy costs, these are split into three areas. Commodity, which is your wholesale electricity cost. Renewables, anything related to generation through a renewable source. And delivery, getting it to your site. This is the main target of increases over the next 5 years. Just a reminder that depending on the size of your supply to site, as to the variances within the cost split of your energy. So let's have a look at the breakdown of these. To note, there has been a smaller taxation added this year, RAB, which is regulated asset base. This is going to support nuclear generation, and that will support more of a stable generation mix of electricity into the grid. However, the topic of today is TNUoS, which is a transmission of energy throughout the grid, getting it through the cabling to your site. The changes we're running through today will support upgrades to an ageing infrastructure, allowing additional growth for new connections and the ability for more export connections of smaller scale generation projects. Ed's going to run through this in more detail of what's happening and the effects on larger users. Ed heads up our account management team for our largest consuming customers. So Ed, what's going on?
Yeah, thank you, Carl. Thank you, Colleen, for the introduction, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Carlene's done a really good job of introducing some of what I was going to talk about, but I thought a little bit of a history lesson might be important to set the context of this. TNUoS, or Transmission Network Use of Service Charge, is something that's been around since 2023 and came out of the Targeted Charging Review, or TCR, where government, National Grid, wanted to see how effective the charging mechanisms for maintaining, expanding, upgrading the national transmission system were. And alongside all the niceties that Carleen introduced in terms of trying to get a lot of the clean power aspirations equally distributed around the United Kingdom. And the review of that, or the result of that, was that the current mechanism, or the previous mechanism, Triad, which was based around the time of day you were consuming electricity, so peak times 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. traditionally, you would pay more for towards this. If you were importing electricity at 3 o'clock in the morning, for example, it would be slightly cheaper. TNUoS, essentially, in short, is going up. That is the answer to what is happening with it. In September, it was announced by National Grid that their previous budget for TNUoS was underestimated by about £3.5 billion, which represents about a 95% difference in their initial estimation. The nature of the transmission network use of service charge is that it's a pass-through to consumers based on their size of connection. Therefore, it's likely that this £3.5 billion gap is going to be passed on to everybody. And I'll talk a little bit more about when we can expect that later. Part of what I wanted to talk about today is energy intensive industries and high voltage meters. So if we move on to the next slide, there's some information on here. And this is, I suppose, somewhat of a bit of advice and a bit of consultation. The network charging compensation scheme is something that is relatively new. Its inception was earlier in 2025, and it was directly out of government recognizing that the costs of electricity, the cost of energy in the United Kingdom meant that many industries were uncompetitive in European and certainly in international markets. Therefore, to try and combat the rising costs of energy and particularly standing charges, they brought out the network charging compensation scheme. Currently, this is worth 60% relief on transmission network use of service, distribution use of service, and balancing system use of service charges. That's going to go up to 90% in April 2026. And there are many industries that are directly in agriculture or agriculture adjacent that can benefit from the network charging compensation scheme. The energy intensive industries list is available online, but some of our neighbouring industries that can potentially get relief are the operation of dairies. Manufacture of animal feeds is another one that is quite prominent within there. It's not just as straightforward as having your business listed on the energy intensive industries list, and that's via your SIC code. You also have to demonstrate that your energy costs are at 20% of your gross value add. And if you have interacted with things like the climate change agreement or even things like the RHI scheme, the renewable heat incentive scheme, it works on a quarterly submission basis. And the relief is directly applied to your energy bills. That is absolutely something that is worth reviewing in terms of your business's SIC codes and seeing if you fit. And I'm more than happy if you energy, I'm more than happy to help you see if you fit within this. So if we move on to the next slide, I suppose this is the next bit of potential relief that's on the horizon, and that's the British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme, or BICS. This is currently open for consultation, and the consultation will run till mid-January. However, this is almost network charging compensation scheme light. The idea is this is going to come in 2027 and will provide a similar relief mechanism to the network charging compensation scheme. However, it's not going to directly relieve, or certainly the first iterations of this aren't going to relieve TNUoS directly. However, some of your other non-commodity costs on your bill that Carly was talking about earlier will be affected by this. So you can potentially get relief from things like your renewable obligation, your feed-in tariff obligation, your capacity market obligation, and many others. It provides really similar relief in terms of the non-commodity costs that small supply exemption can also provide you relief from. Small supply exemption is relief on those standing charge elements where you can prove that half-hourly imported electricity is matched off directly to where it has been generated. And again, that's something that is absolutely worth talking to NFU Energy about in terms of having that applied to your energy contracts as and when they come up for renewal. Moving on to the next slide then, because I appreciate that the British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme is over a year away. The network charging compensation scheme is specifically for energy intensive industries. So not everybody's going to fit that bill, and some relief is over a year away. However, there are some things you can do to mitigate or offset some of these charges that are coming. If we think about the chart that Carly shared earlier, a third of the bill is still on the commodity side of things. So how much electricity you import specifically. So if we can and are able to look at our energy efficiency, so we are not wasting energy, and that can be anything, right down to as simple as timers for lights. So, leaving Christmas trees in the office on overnight, for example, might be something that we want to consider trying to avoid. And that type of activity can lead into direct capacity reduction. This is something that will directly affect your TNUoS charges, as it's based on capacity. So if you have a sizable connection and you're not utilizing all of it, it's worth reviewing whether it's worth the cost of keeping that within your business. Now, a slight caveat to that is, as it currently stands, if you are to reduce your capacity, you have to be able to do so by over 50%, which is something that we are looking to hopefully try and get changed. And I think Lee will probably talk a little bit more about some of the other lobbying elements that we're trying to achieve in regards to TNUoS a little bit later, so I won't spoil that. On that direct topic, reviewing connections, the diverse nature of businesses in agriculture means that you will often have several different connections going into one business, and even in terms of one premises. It's worth reviewing whether you can consolidate some of those connections and some of the use of electricity that comes through those connections within that business, i.e., with a view to remove some of the connection from your sites, thus saving not only the non-commodity but also some of the commodity there too. It seems a little bit obvious to say, as it's extremely popular these days, but self-generation is very, very important to consider. If you are able to kickstart projects such as solar PV to reduce the amount of electricity that you are importing, and thus offsetting some of the increases in standing charges coming your way, that's absolutely worth looking at and absolutely worth considering. Again, feel free to speak to my colleagues and NFU Energy, and we'll be more than happy to talk to you about that. And in a similar vein, and I appreciate this isn't suitable for everybody. However, balancing services are something that's gaining a lot of traction and momentum. And this is not only the generation of electricity onto the grid to help balance it when volumes are scarce, but also turning off when there is a surplus of electricity on the grid. There are various mechanisms such as capacity market, such as static frequency response, where if you have a connection over a megawatt or can aggregate with your neighbors and can demonstrate you can turn off as well as turn on, obviously, you can be paid for that throughout the year. And you just need to demonstrate that when an event occurs, you can turn on or turn off. It's a very, very useful tool to potentially offset and to earn revenue off of the TNUoS increases that are coming. And finally, there is always the off-grid option. And realistically, there are some businesses that will be hit extremely hard by this, and that looking at off-grid generation and being self-sufficient might be the way forward. And I suppose that transitions me on to how your businesses will potentially be affected by TNUoS. And we have developed in conjunction with the NFU a calculator which looks at the TNUoS forecast, looks at a couple of elements from your electricity bill, so your MPAN, and also your KVA, so the size of your connection, and will provide a forecast for you through the remaining 5 years. On the next slide is just a little preview of what the results page looks like. So as you can see there, right through up until 2030, 2031, you can see the changes in those costs forecast there. like I say, you'll need a few figures from your electricity bill or your energy contract. I mean, if you've got your connection agreement lying around, that would also have some of this information on, which would be very helpful. And this will be updated with the latest standing charge updates, which are very, very important to note in terms of some key dates. We were expecting that NESO, the National Electricity System Operator, would publish the first draft of the new TNUoS rates at the end of November. This was delayed, and we are now expecting that by the end of next week that these will be released. Subsequently, we will update the calculator with the new rates. At the moment, they are based on a forecast, and the draft rates will be a lot more accurate to what we'll see in April. The final draft and the final sign off, I'm reliably informed, still will be to the timeline of the end of January. And as I mentioned, these new rates will appear on bills from the 1st of April 2026. Throughout this calculator, we're also asking for a little bit of help. As I mentioned earlier, we are looking in conjunction with the NFU to lobby government for some changes that can provide potential relief to the agriculture and the growing community, as this will affect all sectors, within our community, whether it's whether you're an arable farm or your controlled environment horticulture and everybody in between. This will have a scale of impact, and as I say, that TNUoS calculator will not only help you demonstrate what this will be in terms of a forecast, but also by providing some information about your business, it will help us feed into that lobbying effort, which is very, very important to try and get some relief for what's coming in April. And I'll let my colleague Lee talk about that a little bit later, and I'll be happy at the end of the presentation and the webinar to answer any questions that you may have. So thank you, Carly. I guess I'll hand it back to you as Master of Ceremonies.
Thank you, Ed, very much. Very informative. So as Ed mentioned, there is a lot going on. He's run through the larger consumers, but often some of the smaller ones can't make all of those changes. So we've got Josh. He heads up our utility contract department, and Josh is going to run through the impacts on the smaller consuming customers. Also to know, seen a few questions coming through. Please keep them coming and we will pick them up at the end. Josh, over to you.
Morning, everybody. So thanks for joining us first and foremost. So what I am going to do is I'm going to touch on the smaller users. We'll deem these as non-half-hourly and small half-hourly users. So as we touched on earlier, over 60% of the bills, in short, nowadays don't have anything to do with the wholesale cost of energy. These non-commodity charges, or these third-party charges as some people know them, are having an increase in impact on our spends and on our bills. This is everybody from a domestic customer right up to our largest customers. As a result, what smaller users are going to find it harder to do is to just save money on bills by simply turning off the lights. It's not impossible, but it does become increasingly difficult. This is because the non-commodity charges, they are deemed to sort of have to continue to upgrade the infrastructure, update an aging grid. And as a result, some of these falling into standing charges are really hard to navigate around. Whereas with them being built into unit rates, you can just simply not use the energy and save the money. Likewise with world politics now, it's a smaller part in overall bill costs. We're finding 3 years ago, the impact of the war in Russia and Ukraine was having a massive impact on our energy rates at home for smaller users especially, albeit larger users weren't unduly impacted either. But understanding the charges is going to be key to sort of making the savings where we can. What we're finding across the whole grid going forward, there are 5 different sectors for our smaller users. They'll be banded 1 to 4. And I'll cover that on the next slide shortly, and go into a little bit more detail on what that means and how we can still make changes. Bandings for smaller users have been introduced, and it's worth noting for our smaller customers, this will be based on the usage. On our half-hourly customers, this will still continue to be based on capacity, or some people know it as kVA. So if you could just move on to the next slide for me. So what we've got here is we've just got a bit of information regarding what bandings look like. So your first banding, domestic. Domestic meters generally have their own profile class. For domestic customers, you will normally be able to look on the bill. You'd have a large box with an S for Sierra, and you'd have either a 01 or a 02 in the top left-hand corner. For our non-half-hourly customers, these would normally be meters that start with that top left-hand box being 03, and it could also include 04 meters as well. These customers would actually have a usage pattern. So you can see there your band 1 would be small users, less than 3,986 kilowatt hours of energy a year. Now, just to give you sort of a bit of an insight there, that could be a domestic farmhouse with an office in there. It could be a farm where the meter is just on the electric fence, just to give you some idea there. On the under end of that scale, you would have your LV band 4 meters. This would normally cover your dairy farmers and your larger users of energy. Band 2s and band 3s, you can see there, between 3,900 and just under 14,000 units. And then band 3, just under 14,000 up to 27,000. Now, as you can see, by doing that on usage, there is still a way that you can actually reduce your consumption. Turning off the lights, like I said, whilst it's increasingly difficult, it's not impossible. But if you are sitting borderline at 14,200 units as an example, saving yourself 600 units a year, turning off the lights at every opportunity, making sure, as I touched on earlier, the Christmas tree isn't on 24/7, it's only on when you're in the office, that could actually be a determining factor on whether you sit in band 3 or band 2. If you look at the bottom half of that slide, you'll see our SME half-hourly meters. These are based on capacity. Some people know them as KVA. Where you can't locate this, you can always contact your district network operator. So that will be the likes of National Grid, Scottish Power Networks. They would always be able to tell you what your capacity or KVA on your meter is. But you can see there, it's the same concept. There are 4 bands. If you've got a band 1, that will be less than 80 kVA. You can see there, band 2, 80 to 150, 150 to 250 being band 3, and anything above 250 will be band 4. Now, in terms of looking at this, your standing charges will be directly impacted by what band you're in. In 2025, band 1 meters would normally range between £3 and £7. Band 2s would normally be £7 to £15. Band 3s would be £15 to £23. And band 4s could be on average £23 to £53. This is per day, and this is for basically the upkeep of the grid. If we could just move on to the next slide for me, please, Jenny. So you can see here, what are the average increases? For today's webinar, we are primarily focusing on TNUoS. A big reason for that is you can see the big red arrow in the middle saying it's going up by up to 94%. This is having a big impact, and it is now going to be in line with some of the biggest non-commodity charges that are set out. And this is something that we deem really, really important. As we said earlier, if you are able to shift down one band, it could make quite a big difference to how those bills look in the future. That said, we always have to be aware that there are other charges sneaking up on the side. So what we've done is we've looked at this and we've sort of built an in-house calculator. The team are also really, really helpful. So if you ever need advice, you can always give our offices a call. You can always go through detail telling you what your usage is and how that would impact your bill, what proportion you would be capable of saving by reducing bands. And like I said, the team are always happy to help with that, and we'll have contact details at the end, which we can always look at. In terms of NFU Energy, we do constantly review this. So as my colleague had touched on earlier, NESO did actually slightly delay their initial decision, but we are expecting some updates on the 15th of December. We're also expecting further updates on TNUoS in January, and this will impact everybody from our smallest users right up to our largest users as well. We are currently sitting on a number of working groups. I'll let Lee talk about that in a lot more detail towards the end. But what we are doing is we are driving the insights from the agricultural sector. As we said with the TNUoS calculator, if you do choose to use it, it's really, really important, again, just to ensure that you provide the contact details, lobbying details, because every single meter is put before Ofgem, put before NESO, who are the National Energy Systems Operator, and the more data we have, the more helpful it is. So even as a smaller user, your impact might be smaller, but there's power in numbers. We really want to make sure that we take as much data back when we are lobbying. As I said earlier, the team can definitely support on that. So if you do have any questions when you're using the calculator, please don't hesitate in getting in contact. So if you could just head to the next slide. Yep, so what can be done going forward? So one of the first ones is always a bit of a grey area for people. We speak to a lot of members on the phone day in, day out, and the historic concept for smaller users, some of them are well versed in smart meters and the benefits of them. And we do still have some people that are uncertain on whether a smart meter is the best thing. With the changes set to come in on the grid in the coming years, future proofing would include installing a compatible smart meter. In 2027, 2028, the grid will largely move to what are known as time of use tariffs, especially for smaller users. You're probably seeing some signs of this already. You'll see companies like Octopus, like British Gas, giving away energy free of charge on a weekend. A lot of this is largely dependent on the customer having a smart meter. Without that technology, the supplier isn't able to provide you with that function. And as you get into red, amber and green zones, so times of really, really large usage on the grid, and then times of really, really small usage on the grid, smart meters will have the capacity to change your unit rate. So when there's energy available on the grid, you'll be able to pick up a cheaper price for it, and vice versa. When there's no energy available, it will also be more expensive. We do say take accurate and regular meter readings. It's really important, as I showed you with the bandings. Consumption can play a part on what band you actually fall into when these final changes are made. We would definitely advocate taking meter readings regularly from now, before your banding is actually finalised and set. Utilise your member benefits, seek advice from specialists. Now, at NFU Energy, we have a large team that are always capable of helping, giving you the advice you need. But likewise, we're well aware that energy suppliers, other parties are able to give that advice as well. We would always say come to us as a trusted advisor, but if you're seeking advice, make sure it is coming from a specialist. Final point from me really is, if you've got renewables on site, be aware of your smart export guarantee options. This is really a key one. Some of our data points out that around about 30% of farms across the UK do have some sort of on-site generation or on-site renewable. SEG agreements, they're not really known about. With the end of FIT tariffs or feed-in tariffs coming, we are seeing more people moving on to smart export guarantee or SEG agreements. The importance of this, if you were to have, for example, your import contract, so buying your energy from British Gas, but you were selling your energy back to E.ON, you might only be picking up 3p a unit for what you're selling back. That said, if you moved your export contract over from E.ON to British Gas, as an example, you could pick up to 15p. So again, it's really, really important being aware of how to link your import and your export supplies together. And again, that's something that the team can definitely help with if need be. So on that note, I am going to head back to Carleen. Thanks for listening, and any questions, more than happy to answer them in the Q&A.
Brill, thank you very much, Josh. So as you can see, there's a bit of a difference between the energy consumers being on the larger side or the smaller side, but everyone is going to be affected, and this is across all industry sectors. Now, we're very happy to be joined by Lee from the NFU policy team. Lee's just going to run through, from an agricultural point of view, the areas that we're covering from a lobbying effort and other support options available. So Lee, over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. If you don't know me, I lead the plants group at the NFU, covering our policy work on horticulture, combinable crops and plant health. Although I am speaking today on behalf of the NFU more broadly, because this clearly has implications across all the sectors to a greater or lesser degree. As it has been explained, these changes are coming into effect, the greatest of which will be coming in April. So this is not a matter of reversing that, but it's very much a matter of accessing those support schemes, many of which have been referenced, which have been set up for the precise purpose of mitigating high energy costs for those more energy intensive users. And as a reminder, the government has got these schemes in place in recognition of the relatively high cost of energy provision in the UK, and doesn't want that to be a barrier to competitiveness. And I'm sure those of you that have already looked into these forthcoming changes will agree that this is very much a barrier to competitiveness for food and farming businesses. Edward mentioned a couple of the main mitigations which exist or which have been consulted on, and I'm going to just touch upon those again a little bit more in order to relate them to the lobbying work we're doing. So firstly, as was described, the network charging compensation scheme, as a reminder, you have to fall within an eligible standard industry classification code, a SIC code, and you also have to have electricity costs which are over 20% of your gross value add. Now, accessing this scheme could help our members with the largest energy profiles, such as glass houses, but they're currently not recognised as an energy intensive industry because the SIC code classification fails to recognise subsectors of agriculture and horticulture. I'll come on to that in a bit more detail in a second. We've got a similar situation with the British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme, which was also mentioned earlier. Here there are actually two barriers to access. The first is that this scheme is targeted at what are known as the frontier industries within the government's industrial strategy. Now, these include things like advanced manufacturing, clean energy, financial services, and even creative industries. They do not include food and farming. The second barrier for the British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme is, again, needing to be within an eligible SIC code. And while these have not yet been determined for this particular scheme, we know farming sits outside of the industrial strategy and therefore is not recognised as a frontier industry. But history tells us that we're likely to fall outside of the eligibility for the SIC codes as well. Now, the NFU has been and continues to push for greater recognition within the industrial strategy. And while it does appear we're out of scope for this British Industrial Competitiveness Scheme, there are some questions within that consultation which we can use to further our broader ask of recognition. So we are preparing a response to that consultation. It closes in mid-January, and we will be setting out the issues and challenges and the energy intensity of food and farming businesses. Importantly, we've also, and we continue to do so, pushed for a review of the SIC codes for food and farming. For agriculture, SIC codes are grouped by the product, not by the production system. So this means we have high energy intensive products grouped under the same SIC code as lower energy intensive products. And therefore that brings down the average and we fall outside of the definition of energy intensive industries. Now, while the UK SIC codes are a mirror of international SIC codes, the UK government did give itself the ability to add an extra digit to each code so that effectively they can be broken down to an additional layer. Now, to date, this has not been done for any SIC code, although we are aware they are starting to look at it for some other industries. We are clearly pushing for this to happen to better reflect the diversity of the subsectors within farming. And should this happen, we know that the energy intensity of some of our farming sectors already align or even exceed some industries already recognised as energy intensive. So addressing the issue of the SIC codes is vital, as it could see eligibility for the existing schemes become much more likely. Another potential mitigation, which hasn't yet been mentioned, is relation to something called the Targeted Charging Review. Now, this is an Ofgem initiative which was set up with the aim to modernise the electricity network and ensure there's a fair allocation of transmission and distribution charges for businesses and customers. Now, this has implications for how the bands are defined and where businesses fall within those bands. And as an example of how farming businesses are impacted by this, standing charges, I think it was mentioned earlier, are based on your peak demand, whereas farming businesses, of course, are very often seasonal in nature, and their peak electricity use does not sufficiently reflect the seasonality of their energy requirements. So NFU and NFU Energy have previously fed into consultations making the point about seasonal energy users. But in addition to that, NFU Energy has been involved in a working group specifically looking at the allocation of banding for charges, or what are recognised as, and they call them peaky customers. And a proposal was made to introduce something called a high capacity usage, low utilisation scheme, and that would result in reduced capacity charges for occasional high power users. But this proposal has not yet resulted in a decision by Ofgem. Now, the introduction of a high capacity usage, low utilisation scheme would likely have a much broader reach than the network charging compensation scheme, which is aimed only at the most energy intensive sectors. So the NFU president has written to the chair of Ofgem to call for an urgent decision, but importantly for implementation ahead of April 2026. Now, the issue of energy costs and provision, of course, is one the NFU has raised frequently with ministers, including, for example, during the significant energy inflation 3 or 4 years ago. And that did result in access to grant funding for some protected cropping businesses, which previously were ineligible. But some of the most critical steps to support energy intensive farming businesses, as described throughout this webinar, are still to be addressed. So I do want to re-emphasise, it has been stated already, but re-emphasise the importance of members using that energy calculator, partly so that they can see what the potential impacts are for them as a business, but critically so that we can collate the anonymised data and add further weight to our calls for change. And just to re-emphasise, we won't see your personal data, we won't see individual, but the collection of that data we can use overall in order to help build a case. Importantly, it will also show the impacts across different sectors, because different sectors will be impacted in various different ways. There are a handful of extra questions at the very end of that calculator after you've received your results, which are more focused on the lobbying work we're doing. So if you can go through right to the very end, that we'd be very grateful for it. So I'll just finish off by saying there's clearly a number of technical barriers in order to access these schemes, getting over the line of, eligible SIC codes or industrial strategy definitions, etc. But to overcome those technical barriers, what we really need to do is secure political support. And we've been engaging with senior DEFRA civil servants, with MPs, with ministers on this matter. But the evidence is key. In order to gain that political support, we do need the evidence behind it. And again, that calculator is really important for that. So thank you for those that have done it. Those that haven't, the more data we get this side of Christmas, the quicker we can act, the more evidence we can throw into those discussions. And our aim is to get changes to these policies so that we can have more access to those schemes before, of course, those largest cost increases hit. I'll leave it there if that's okay. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lee, for running through all of the wider efforts that we're working on. So as you can see, the increases are going to hit everyone, and there's a lot of areas to explore to reduce the impact on your business. To prepare for these changes and support the NFU's wider support measures, you can find the TNUoS calculator through the website link here. Alternatively, you can find it through the NFU Energy or NFU's main website pages. Next is to take action. So grab an electricity invoice, log on to the calculator for a clearer view of how it's going to affect you directly. Within that, obviously sharing your support for our lobbying efforts at the end. The calculator will give you more of a direct view of current costs and also the incremental changes over the next 5 years. Any issues with that calculator, either finding the information or actually running through the website, please do pop us an email, give us a call. We can manually put it through so that everything is still recorded for the lobbying efforts, but also we can support with anything that doesn't run through that calculator calculations. What can you do? So main things to focus on: review your energy contract and costs and the different products that you're on as well. For larger consumers, there are different things you can do in terms of costing and managing the flow of those incremental increases. Review your site usage and efficiencies. As Ed mentioned, these taxations are based on the energy consumed at site. So reducing that and looking at efficiencies on site is key. Then also looking at any renewable projects you can implement, any self-generation, so it removes or reduces the reliance of grid electricity to site. If you want any other support on anything we've run through today or any of the efforts to reduce the impact, please do call the number below or send an email across to our info inbox. We'll be sending out a copy of the webinar recording as well as the calculator link to all participants. So you can share that with anyone else that you think it may support, or also you can reflect on the webinar later for anything that you've not consumed, because there was a lot of information this morning. Now for questions. We've had quite a few through already. And we've had a few answers come through the chat, but I just want to reiterate a few of them that are on there. So let me just have a quick browse. So if I reduce my capacity, can I get it back at a later stage if I need it back? So Ed, what would you say about that?
Thanks, Carly, and thanks for the question. It really is DNO dependent, so geographically where you are and who your network is, and what the constraints are. I think in terms of just timing for this webinar, it's worth having a chat with one of our project team. So call into NFU Energy, and when we can look at that in a little bit more detail for you in terms of the likelihood. Some of this TNUoS work, I suppose it is worth also mentioning, is designed to expand the grid where possible. So if this is successful, it should open some doors to accessing capacity on the network easier. However, that's probably a little bit further down the road.
Brilliant, thank you. And just to note that there is always a risk with reducing your capacity that the availability might not be there if you do want it again. So it's well worth taking into consideration your business growth projections and any other changes with electrification on reducing that. So having a look at the bills. So is TNUoS added to my bills? And as and when they renew, or is it mid-contract? If we've already got a contract in place, are we protected from these increases? Josh, can you answer that one?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute there, so I can pick that one up. Thanks for the question, first and foremost. So yeah, in short, there are quite a few different answers to this. I'll try and give as simple an answer as possible. First part of that is, number one, it largely depends on your supplier. So different suppliers have different clauses built in. Every single contract now does have a clause saying, dependent on third-party charges, we can reopen the contract in the future. We touched on really early in the webinar things like RAB, which is new nuclear stations being built. Some suppliers pass through those charges straight away mid-contract and just added it on as a new line to the bills. Other suppliers were able to guard, they had forecast a lot better. So in short, some of your larger suppliers are historically a little bit more secure on what they can do, albeit not all of them. We would strongly advise just calling in, and we will have that conversation with you. All of the team are well versed in what suppliers have more fixed contracts and which ones are a little bit more risky. So unfortunately, no clear answer on that, but we would definitely say each case is definitely different there.
Thank you. And Lee, potentially one for you. Can you confirm if soft fruit growers are not currently eligible for the compensation scheme?
Yeah, sadly, the simple answer is yes, that's true. So there's only a couple of exceptions in the food and farming industry, which are classified as energy intensive industries. In horticulture, no subsector of horticulture is classified. And that's why this SIT code piece is so important, because actually if that could be broken down to further layers, then some subsectors within horticulture would definitely meet the test in order to be classified as energy intensive. There's two ways of going about it. One is to get the SIT codes themselves updated or broken down further, I should say. But the government have demonstrated at least once before, when they did open up something called the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund, which they managed to do this and open it up for some protected cropping businesses a few years ago during the peak of the energy inflation. And they did that without actually changing the SIC code. They used other mechanisms in order to create the eligibility for it. So the simple answer to the question is no, sadly not. There are no eligible sectors within horticulture or most farming to access these schemes, but we're looking at it in multiple different ways to try and make sure that they do have access, and certainly before April next year.
Brilliant. We've got another question, which Josh might be for you. We've mentioned future time of use pricing on smart meters. Is this expected to be available for half-hourly AMR meters?
Short answer on that is we're not 100% certain. We would expect that it's available for all users in the future. We're seeing it trialled on domestic. As I said, you're seeing the adverts at the moment with free energy being given away. In short, the reality is it's probably cheaper to give that energy away free to customers than it is to pay somebody to not generate and send the energy into the grid. You would expect as time goes by that will fall through all customer bases. Like I said, we're getting insights from suppliers. This will begin in 2027, 2028. It'll probably start with your smaller users, and gradually we would expect it to go up that chain and impact larger users going forward.
Bro, and then we've had another one about future sites. So how can you be prepared for site expansions or additions into the group? So that one would be on a bespoke review process. So with any information like that, please do get in touch, and we can try and have a look. We have a number of partners that are quite close to the distribution network and new connections. We can get a view. We cannot guarantee or give pure exact data, but we can help support with some of the contract options available for any site expansions or new additions to your portfolio. Okay, looking at all of the questions in the Q&A box and on the chat, I think we've covered off everything. In terms of the slides, they will be coming out to you by email. The link will be in the email for the calculator. You've got our contact details. We're happy to help and support wherever we can. So please do reach out, and hopefully we'll be in touch with each of you soon. Otherwise, good luck and help protect your business going forward. Thank you very much for your time today.